Secretary. And I think we all agree with you. The purpose of the sanctions imposed on Iran was to get Iran to the negotiating table. But I think it's also important to remember the perspective that we had about what we would get in those agreements at the negotiating table. If you recall, the early suggestion was that Iran could basically keep the right to import nuclear fuel, but that would then allow the dismantling of their nuclear weapons capability. And here's the problem, Mr. Secretary. As I said in my statement, we've heard the administration say that Iran has no right to enrich, but the Iranians this week say they do. And the Joint Action Plan indicates that the U.S. would accept an Iranian enrichment program. Iran, from our standpoint, does not need this technology to generate electricity. Clearly, we're prepared to allow them to import nuclear fuel, but if they have this technology, it is exactly what they do need to make a nuclear weapon. So am I reading this right? Is the administration's position that while it may not recognize Iran's right to enrich, Iran will in practice retain an enrichment program as part of the final agreement? That is the question.
It depends, Mr. Chairman, on the final agreement. It is not locked in, no. If you go to the agreement, I'll read you from the agreement, the last paragraph says that it would involve a mutually defined enrichment program with mutually agreed parameters consistent with practical needs. That's a very important concept. It has to relate to whatever it is practically that they might have a reason for arguing they need it for, like medical research or whatever it is, but that would be very limited. It then says with agreed limits on scope and level of enrichment activities and capacity, and where it's carried out, and stocks of enriched uranium for a period to be agreed upon. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 mutually agreed or agreed upons. Now, those are going to have to be agreed upon, and if they can't be, no, they won't have one. If it's so limited and so verifiable and so transparent and so accountable, and you have all of the attributes of cradle-to-grave documentation. One of the things I didn't mention to you, we got in the first step, is access to their mining facilities, so we can trace how much they're mining. We have access to their milling, so we can trace the transition. We have access to the centrifuge workshops. We have access to the centrifuge storage facilities. So we're building the capacity here to know exactly what is happening in an unprecedented fashion. And I will say, as I said to Foreign Minister Zarif in our negotiations, there is no right to enrich in the NPT, but neither is it denied. The NPT is silent on the issue.
Well, it is, of course, the most important concession that they wanted. Well, and from our standpoint, as you know, the goal was, as I explained, you're right. If they can enrich to 20%, they're 80% there in terms of a bomb. But if they can enrich to 5%, because of the way technology works, once you master it, if you can enrich to 5%, you're still 70% of the way there towards getting a bomb. So the question going forward that we have is focused on precisely how we dismantle their nuclear weapons program, and that's why we really appreciate this dialogue with you today. There was an additional discussion that I wanted to have on this quote-unquote managed access. I talked to the director of the IAEA, and the inspectors on the International Atomic Energy Agency will have certain abilities, managed access, as we say, with respect to the locations in which the centrifuges, as you said, are assembled, or where they're produced. But does this include access to the military base in Parchin, the military base where the IAEA alleged to me that testing for weapons designs takes place? And I would just ask you also about another point which they have made, which is that Iran is out of compliance with respect to their ICBM program. There are 3-stage ICBMs that they're developing. And so what type of access at the end of the day are the IAEA really going to possess here?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me answer a couple of things there if I can, because it's very important to this process. In any negotiation, and you all know this because you negotiate around here every day, you can have a wish list and you approach it from a UN Security Council resolution point of view and say, well, this is where we'd like to be, but then there's the question of where you can really be. Now, without what we've achieved here, Iran would be progressing towards its nuclear weapon now. The window would be narrowing in terms of its breakout time. Israel would be more at risk if we weren't where we are today. That's where we were heading. And from Iran's point of view, as they look at it, they say to themselves, well, wait a minute now. There are about 17 countries in the world that have nuclear programs that are peaceful, and about 4 or 5 of them enrich. And why can't we? Well, obviously, the answer from all of us is because you're out of sync with the IAEA standards, with the NPT, and et cetera. But if they came into compliance, what is it that says that they then couldn't be able to do it? That's their question to us. Now, they say to us, okay, you guys say we ought to completely end enrichment, and yet you're not willing to give us sanctions relief. To them, the balance in the negotiation is, if we give up the very thing we're fighting to be able to do, then you ought to give up the thing that you're using to get us to do it. So their equivalency was, we stop enrichment, you stop sanctions altogether. Now, there isn't anybody here who would have stopped sanctions altogether at that point, because we have to build a process. So what we did was we got, I thought, a remarkable amount. We stopped their program, and we have eliminated the 20% and rolled back their breakout time, enlarged it, while we move towards the final negotiation. Now, the final negotiation is going to be in conjunction with all of our partners. And whatever we do, it's got to make Israel safer. It's got to make the world safer. It can't threaten the Emirates. It can't threaten Saudi Arabia. It can't threaten the region. We all understand this. It has to be a peaceful program. We have to know this to a certainty. And it isn't hard to prove a program is peaceful if it really is. So we're now in the main game. And what we're saying to you is respectfully that you should give us an opportunity, working with you, we'll brief you, we'll be keeping everybody informed, we're working with our friends to make sure we're all on the same page as we go through this process of proof. Now, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. There are dimensions of the ballistic missiles that are of great concern, and we're well aware of that. And there's the Parchin military development facility that's of great concern. The fact is that we believe this agreement also opens the door for our ability to deal with some of that. And the language specifically is, the plan says that Iran will work with the IAEA to facilitate resolution of past and present issues of concern. Past and present issues of concern is formula language for the IAEA and Iran in addressing possible military dimensions, including Parchin. It also says that in the final step, they have to have a resolution of our concerns, which is understood to include the military dimensions of the program, which are on the table. In addition, the plan says there'll be some interim steps, additional steps in between the initial measure and the final step, including addressing the UN Security Council resolutions with a view toward bringing to a satisfactory conclusion the UN Security Council's consideration of this matter. The UN Security Council, you'll remember, Mr. Chairman, sought suspension, not prohibition. And in effect, we now believe that in this plan that we've laid out, Iran is required to address the UN Security Council resolutions regarding its nuclear program before a comprehensive agreement can be reached. And the UN Security Council Resolution 1929, which is contained in that, specifically addresses ballistic missiles. So the answer is, it's on the table. It's part of the discussion.
Well, my time has expired. I want to thank you. As you know, I'm very concerned about this Iranian regime being allowed enrichment capability. At the end of the day, I don't think, since neighboring countries don't have it, I think it's a problem that might set off something of an arms race among its neighbors. But I want to go now to Mr. Elliot Engel of New York for his questions.